Hello and welcome to the episode number 66 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Now, Gar, today is a real special episode because we're going to do a first in the history of our little time machine show. And for the first time ever, we're going to do a second episode on one of our favorite classic TV shows that we've already got an episode on. But what makes this so special is 2024 marks the 50th anniversary of Happy Days. And yes, you can go back and look at our Happy Days episode that we previously did, and we hope you do. But this is a celebration of 50 years of Happy Days and what the show means to us and our memories. And there's so much more about Happy Days that we didn't even get to talk about in the first episode. So that's why we're doing this. To start off episode, Gar, when you think of Happy Days, what's the first thing you think of, or why did the show mean so much to you?
Okay. My generation, the people that are in my age group, when I was in high school age, it's a customary thing to do that high school kids do today. It's a themed day. And back when I was in high school, that themed day was 50s.
Yeah.
And I remember, that people would go to school dressed like they were in the 50s.
Sure.
And I remember, of course, the girls with the skirts and the classic outfits, kind of school outfits, from that time period. But then there also a classic thing was the girls' shoes, those black and white shoes.
Yeah.
That were classic from that time period. And I just remember, it was like a thing, to go to school and the kids that I went to school with, had a lot of fun with it. There were a lot of kids that participated and dressed up and everything. See, nowadays, I have a feeling that it's still 80s. For the kids nowadays, go to school.
Yeah, 80s is a retro thing.
In the 80s.
Yeah, 80s is a retro thing these days for kids.
But my time it was the 50s, and so it was a ready-made time for a show like that to come out, because this is in the 70s at the exact same time that Happy Days came out.
Yeah, and Gar,
you see what I mean? Yeah. It was a thing that was going on where people were doing it, for like high school kids and dressing up, and we all look at one of those human characteristics is we like to dress up.
Sure.
And we like to, Halloween. We, and tribute bands, and all of this stuff. We like to dress up like this or like that. It's a fun thing to do, and it's always full of giggles and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that really, kind of. I think I described a time period that was just so ripe for a show like that to come out.
Sure, and Gar, do you have any idea why, when Happy Days was created, why the 50s was chosen, as a time frame?
I don't know, but I would just guess it was the 50s is a snapshot of Americana at that time.
Sure, but to be more specific, what I was able to learn is that the show's creator, Gary Marshall, that's the time frame that, he was a teenager and that he grew up in, and he wanted to do a show based on, the time when he grew up, because apparently he had, as we all do from when we grow up, he had special memories of that time in his life when he grew up, and this was his way of kind of looking back on those, on the best times of his life. Not necessarily was based on his life, but certain episodes had something to do with maybe things that he experienced or went through. And Happy Days, I think, why so many. I mean, we're talking about 5 decades, Gar, 50 years, 5 generations of people tuning into this show through reruns. Since the original broadcast when it originally premiered, and that's quite a number of people. And let's look at the Happy Days show itself. I mean, I think one thing we can agree that everybody wants to do is feel like they belong, feel like they fit in. And you look at the cast of characters we had on Happy Days. I mean, starting with the kids originally the show, let's first talk about, was supposed to be centered around Ron Howard's character of Richie Cunningham. Now, when you think of Richie Cunningham, what are some things that come to mind?
Typical teenage boy from that time period.
Honest, hardworking.
Classic.
Yeah, honest,
yes.
Hardworking. Does good in school. Never lets his mom and dad down. Never did. He's kind of the example, if you will, of the family. Whereas when the show originally aired, the first 2 seasons, the family was presented as having 3 kids. The oldest was Chuck, who was a basketball star, at the local college. And then, of course, Richie Cunningham, we just mentioned, he was a middle child. And then Joni was a little kind of brat daughter, and she was the youngest of the bunch. And then, a couple seasons into the show, we no longer see or hear about Chuck Cunningham. He just kind of vanishes from the show.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, it's just like he vanished.
Yeah.
But you can do that, what
yeah.
I mean?
In TV.
It's a TV show.
Yeah, and we'll get into why they did that in a little bit, but getting back to kind of the cast of characters, I mean, so the Cunningham family too was the centerpiece of the show, and you had Richie's friends, Ralph and Potsy, hanging around, and they had families of their own, but for some reason they were always hanging out at the Cunninghams. They were always having more fun at the Cunninghams than maybe at their own family homes.
Well, that existed at that time period. There was. I remember when I was in high school, there was a family. That their son just had a ton of friends, and we all used to go over to his house, and it was like a regular thing. And they had a room, with a pool table and a bunch of stuff, and that's where we would hang out and play pool and hang out, and they were just like the cool parents that allowed their kid to do things, where other households would not allow, that many people coming over, that much traffic coming, in and out of their house and stuff like that. And it was all good fun.
Sure.
When we were going over to his house, it was all good fun. We weren't up to, anything bad. We were just being typical teenagers, back in the 70s, because that's when I was a teenager, the 1970s.
Yeah.
And, so, I so relate, to, that the Cunningham house, because I remember that part of my teenage life.
Yeah.
Everybody was hanging out over at Bob's house.
Yeah. I got a similar kind of story I can relate to. In fact, my brother Bob, oddly enough, you say that, he had this friend when he was going to school that always came to our house. I mean, he grew up in a family where his father was a strict preacher. He was a preacher at the local church, and he was really strict, my brother's friend. But anyways, he was always hanging out at our house. He was always coming and just having these long, drawn out discussions with my father and about politics and just everyday life. And then my brother would always tell him, "Hey, did you come over here to hang out with me or to hang out with my dad?" And his response was like, "Yeah, your dad's just such a cool guy." And then this same guy would tell our grandmother, "Hey, Grandma, what are you guys having for dinner?" Because he'd often and nobody really minded, but he'd invite himself over to dinner. He'd be like, "Hey, Grandma, what are you having? What are we having for dinner?" She goes, "Oh, you're going to eat here again."
And that was, that was a thing. I don't know if that exists now. I'm not a teenager and I'm not really part of that, so I have no idea. But I do remember, my teenage years, that was a thing. There was, not everybody's house. It was kind of a rarity, but there was always somebody that had cool parents that didn't mind, all the kids coming over and hanging out. And just being teenagers at their house, and and I think it, in retrospect or looking back, I think it was their thinking that it was their way of being able to keep their eye on their kids. To make sure that they're, at least if they're home, they can keep an eye on them. Because when they're away from home, who knows what they're going to wind up doing, because they are teenagers, and at that age group, teenagers are notorious for making bad decisions. You know what I mean? Because they're teenagers. They don't have enough data yet to make good decisions.
In fact,
the whole thing about the Cunningham house, was obviously going on in the 50s too.
And the thing with the Cunningham family in the house, it was very welcoming, and it's funny as we sit here, Gar, celebrating 50 years of Happy Days. We're talking about the show like these were real people. These were people on our TV screen, but the show was so relatable. It was so real. You felt like these were real people. You felt like these were people you knew. I mean, and I think part of the reason everybody was so loved the Cunningham family so much is like we watch the friends hanging out with the family, and you're like, oh, they're here every day instead of hanging out with their own family. But it made you realize that, maybe even for the first time in my life, because I came from a pretty warm, loving family like the Cunningham family, but it made you realize, maybe, just maybe, not everybody comes from a warm and loving family, and this is the other kids hanging out with the family. That's their way of kind of getting a chance to maybe hang with a regular family,
Well, in my childhood, I was one of those kids. I lived in an abusive house.
Wow.
And my childhood was, I have some horrific stories.
Wow, sorry to hear
about
that,
my childhood. Yeah. So that I was one of those kids that was hanging out at other people's houses for that very reason. Wow. So yeah, I was one of those kids.
Wow, I never knew that about you, Gar. And I will just say, you hide it well, because you seem, for the most part, like a pretty happy-go-lucky guy, and so again, that just shows, you never really truly know a person. But again, Happy Days was one of those shows, I think, like I said, these are people on our TV screen, and yet we relate to them so much like they were real people. I mean, the lovely, another loving reference for Mr. and Mrs. C. I mean, they became known as Mr. and Mrs. C, and that's just one of those things that kind of naturally happened,
Well, it was a snapshot of what was going on in society at that time, and they were able to make a whole show about it, because how many shows do you see where you have a family where everybody's coming over to their house? They got a revolving door of everybody likes to hang out, and they've got a huge
cast of characters,
amount of friends, and stuff like that. And so that was a part of America. Those households did exist, and they were kind of a rarity. They weren't, not everybody's house was like that.
Wow.
But I remember it all the way up to the 70s, and I really, I hope to the core of my being, that things like that still exist. Where there are people, that have those open door things where they have a lot of friends and that whole that whole kind of thing, because I cannot think of a whole lot of shows on TV that really had that as part of the recipe of the show.
Yeah, and Gar, as Americana as Happy Days was, let's be honest, it wasn't totally like, they didn't have the total clean cut image of, say, a show like Leave It to Beaver, but actually was around in the 50s where, I mean, let's look at the father, Mr. C. We talked about this in some past episodes. He was kind of at that time considered, America's father, the ideal idea of what a father should be. But yet, at the same time, I mean, I remember watching an episode where, my wife is not going to go out and work, and other things like, like I just watched an episode in preparing for today's episode where Mrs. C gets in a car, not really a car accident, but she forgot to put the emergency brake on the car, so it rolls down and crashes into Arnold's, and he's like, "Oh my God, you forgot to put the brake on! How stupid can you be?" But this is America's father, yet he talks to his wife like this, and of course, none of us are perfect. You know what I mean, Gar? But that was America's father at that time, and yet he was also kind of a chauvinist pig at the same time.
That was how society was at that time.
So it was an honest portrayal.
That was acceptable behavior at that time.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I always kind of go back to that.
Yeah.
Is because, this is a pop culture show, and you can't have pop culture without society, because society is what dictates changes in pop culture.
Sure. And
you know what I mean?
Let's talk another thing about the parents in particular, Mr. and Mrs. C. Like we talked about it when we did the episode on the Newlywed Game, but Bob Eubanks, doing the Newlywed Game, could not get away with saying like making love, so he made up the phrase making whoopee, and everybody was able to figure out what he was talking about. Even me as a little kid, I'd ask my mom and dad, "What is whoopee?" And based on the response I got, okay, it must be something bad, But at the same time, like talking about, Happy Days was interesting the way the parents would kind of they'd get romantic. They'd have these little moments where they'd embrace, and they'd always their way of kind of dealing with that was kind of, "Oh, Howard, oh, Marion, do you want to go upstairs and get frisky?" Or the kids would walk in when they're embracing, "Oh, they're getting frisky again."
Well, it was just, without American Graffiti, you don't have Happy Days.
Yeah.
Without American Graffiti, I guarantee you that was the seed that was planted in Gary Marshall's mind.
You're so right.
You know what I mean? And and obviously it was the seed because he wound up choosing Ron Howard, as the centerpiece, which basically was the centerpiece of American Graffiti too.
You're so right, Gar, because I don't see how Gary Marshall saw American Graffiti and did not think, okay, I want to do something like that, because let's be honest, shortly after American Graffiti premiered, I think it was 1974 when Happy Days premiered, so only a couple years later, I think maybe 1 year later to be exact, and you have Ron Howard, so you definitely see the connection where he thought, okay, if George Lucas was successful with this film, which is about the 50s, which I come from, and that's kind of what I want to do, maybe I could be successful too. And Gar, we are already 25 minutes into the episode, and I bring this up because it's amazingly that we have not mentioned the obvious topic of conversation, which we're going to get to now, which is the Fonz. Because how can you talk about?
We always talk about in different episodes, like say for example the Nutty Professor.
Sure.
The original Nutty Professor. The Buddy Love character was based on the cool guy.
Yeah.
And during my high school days in the 70s, there was always that guy that just the girls gravitated towards him, and everybody wanted to be like that guy. You know what I mean? And Buddy Love was based on that character. Well, that is the exact same formula of the Fonz.
Yeah.
Because obviously in all generations there is always that one guy that all the other guys wish that they could be like that guy.
Yeah.
The cool guy. And that was Fonz, man. Hey.
Yeah.
He's so cool that all he's got to do is go up to the jukebox and hit it on the side, and now it works perfectly.
And of course,
you know what I mean? He's just that cool.
And of course,
you know what I mean?
We laugh at that stuff now, but see, the thing about it is, like you're saying, there was just no question that the Fonz could do that. I mean, I didn't even question it. It's like, of course he can do it. He's so cool. Kind of like what you're saying, Gar, is the show, like we said, was originally supposed to be centered around the character of Richie Cunningham. But the reason they really couldn't do that once they brought a Fonzie character in it, because let's be honest, okay, in reference to Richie Cunningham, we said he was nice, hardworking, honest. He was a good kid. He was a kid that got good grades. He never disappointed mom and dad. Okay, basically nice, honest, hardworking guy. And then you got the Fonz, which we describe as, cool and the guy that could do nothing. Everybody wanted to be like him.
He was also the guy with the rough edges, the guy from the wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah, so if given the choice, especially referring to men, would most men want to be considered the nice guy or the cool guy?
Well, and there's an appeal of both.
Yeah.
There's middle America that will just absolutely gravitate towards the Richie Cunningham character.
Yeah.
But then there's also all the other people that are a little bit more edgy. Mm-hmm. Like things a little, things that are a little bit racy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A little edgy. You know what I mean? Now you've got a TV show with both of those ingredients in it.
Yeah, and in fact, Gar, the thing about Richie Cunningham, as nice and smart and everything as he was, like often other characters, in the show would refer to him, they'd say, "Oh, you're humdrum, you're dull." In fact, I was watching an episode just today that I taped where Fonzie gets into, he's racing a car and he gets in a race car accident. And he has a real close, as they say, he saw his life flash before his eyes, and he comes and tells the family, "Oh, whoa, I had to brush with death." And he's like, well, "I'm going to change my ways. I'm going to, I'm going to take life serious and this and that. I'm going to be like Richie here." And then, Joni chimes in, "Boring, dull?" Well, yeah, because then I don't want to take all these chances I've been taking and risk my life. And then after a couple of days of that, he's like, he goes back to kind of being the Fonz, and he's like, "Hey, I'd rather be cool than, it's not working for me, being like this guy." And but then he gets baptized, and during the same episode, he tells the family he's going to get baptized, and he wants them all there, and the Fonz gets dressed up in a suit, and Mrs. C's like, "Oh, we would be so honored to be your godparents." Now you have to be in by 6 p.m. just like Richard and Joni, but you know what I mean. So they were there for the Fonz. He wants the family there for him, but even Fonzie realizes kind of, I got to be me.
Well, that's. I think everybody goes through their life, especially in their teenage years, trying to find their identity. And, not realizing in those teenage years that everything that you try to make yourself be, it's a square peg, round hole thing. Yeah. You just got to be yourself. And that's basically what everybody winds up doing in their lives. You wind up just kind of like, okay, and then, and then you just wind up being yourself. But in your teenage years, you're always experimenting with other identities. And, that, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
it's a kind of a thing, that is, a normal thing that goes on in teenagers in that part of their life.
Yeah, and the other thing about the Fonzie character is he's hanging out all these kids in high school that what he considers to be kind of nerds, not as cool as him. So the first thought is, why is he hanging out with these people? Now let's be honest. They develop a friendship, and eventually they become like real good friends. And the other kids are seeking Fonzie's approval. First of all, they want to be like him, and then when they all get in touch, they in a way they're all using each other. That sounds awful to say, but because Fonzie's a cool guy, all the kids want to hang with him. They all want to be like him. And then also, when they get in tough spots, Fonzie comes to their rescue. He's the local hero.
Yeah, he's instead of the good guy in white, he's the good guy in black.
Yeah.
Or the good guy with the black leather jacket.
Yeah. And the thing too is Fonzie. If you look at his kind of character, he's not really seeking approval for from everybody, but his approval is like just kind of it's guaranteed. It's immediate. Nobody questions his authority or anything he does or says. In fact, it's almost kind of in a way like he's the local preacher, and the fact that everybody goes to the Fonz for advice. Everybody cares about what the Fonz thinks.
Well, they really turned his character, into something that America really gravitated towards, because we all know that the first season he wasn't even in the opening credits. He wasn't even considered in much going to be much in the show.
In fact,
but then the rise of his popularity, he wound up becoming, this
superstar.
The superstar of the show. It's basically an accidental superstar, because it was never in the plans, at the beginning, and it just wound up happening organically on its own.
In fact, I remember having an album. I forget but an album with the Fonz on the cover, like a 50s music, like had Charlie Brown and stuff like that, and it was just one of the things you had to have as a kid if you loved watching the Fonz. And people started. People laugh at this now, but people started going out to buy leather jackets. Leather jackets all of a sudden became a cool thing again, And you'd be surprised that a TV show or a TV character could have that kind of power, but it did.
Well, and it ran for a long time.
One of the longest running shows at that time. I mean, they had a total of 11 seasons. I think I was reading 255 episodes, so that's quite a bit. And the thing is, like you were saying, Fonzie's character kind of while it wasn't immediate, the fans, the show's viewers immediately reacted to the character, and it was Gary Marshall deciding to take a real giant leap. In that, if you notice, the Fonz initially didn't wear a leather jacket; it was kind of a windbreaker type of coat, and again. We didn't think of this at the time when we were watching the show originally, Gar, but even in the windbreaker coat, he was still a cool guy. We didn't question it, but I don't know what it was. Something about the leather jacket just gave him that it factor, gave him that authority, whatever it was that was missing,
and also that edgy.
Yeah.
It gave him like that edginess.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Where it just when you're adding an edgy character to the cast, it also broadens your scope of the range of your fan base, because now you're including other people in the audience that gravitate towards edgy characters.
And Gary Marshall,
because that is a separate faction. It's not part of Middle America faction, which is the largest TV base.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But here's another thing that came across my mind is that George Lucas did American Graffiti for the exact same reason as Gary Marshall.
Yeah.
It was their childhood. It was, the 50s was their teenage years.
Sure.
And it was a passion project that George Lucas, did. He didn't have support from the studios. He had to make American Graffiti as a low budget movie. Mm-hmm. And when you watch it now, you can see how low budget it is. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it was a passion project, just like it was for Gary Marshall. So both people did their 50 shows that are both intertwined with each other for the exact same reasons.
Yeah, and Gar, I mean, even Fonzie, the reason originally he wore the windbreaker was because ABC, where the show was on, they told Gary Marshall, no, if we have him wearing a leather jacket, they're going to think he's a hood. They're going to think he's a criminal. The so-called experts thinking they know better. And if anything, and I think that had a lot to do with Henry Winkler, the way he portrayed the character, you could not help but love the Fonz. I mean, there was even an episode I remember where, later in the years of Happy Days, where Mr. C is having a conversation with Fonzie, telling him, Fonzie, I remember the first time I ever met you, I never thought you would have been somebody I wanted my family to hang out with, my children, or let alone consider you a member of our family. But now you're part of the family, basically. And so, see, it showed you that even so-called normal people could think this was a good guy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that was a critical element to the appeal.
Yeah.
To the audience and broadening that audience, making it even larger, because now you're inclusive to a part of the audience that at that time in the 70s mm-hmm. was not catered to.
Yeah.
TV shows were not catering to people that wanted things that were edgy.
Yeah.
That were a little bit on the racy side, a little bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And again, Gar, in prepping for today's episode, I was watching a couple episodes of Happy Days that I taped, on the local retro channel. But anyway, there was an episode that I talked about earlier where Fonzie gets baptized, and this little bit of trivia was kind of revealed. I never knew this, so I'm going to just ask you. I don't think you probably know, but let's see. Any idea, and I just learned this today, any idea what Fonzie's middle name is?
Oh, Arthur.
No, Arthur is...
No, Arthur...
It's Arthur Fonzarelli. Now, what I learned in this episode today...
Arthur, I don't.
I think it was only revealed...
I know. It's like one of those, it's on the tip of my tongue.
I think it was only revealed... I
don't have it.
Okay, that's why I wrote it down. I think because I didn't even know it, and I'm such a fan, but I think it might have only been revealed in this one episode where he's being baptized. Arthur Herbert Fonzarelli.
I was going to say Wilbur, but Herbert's pretty...
And then even in the episode, Potsy yells out, like laughingly, Herbert! And the Fonz gives him a look, sorry, Fonz.
It seems like, I'm sure the Fonz, you're lucky if you live if you know what my middle name is.
Yeah. Hey, now, Gar, you and I, in planning to do this episode today, this is one of the things we talked about we're going to get into now that was a big part of the show. The language. I'm going to go down a list and just see if you're aware. I'm sure you are. Hey, bucko, exactamundo. I still got it. Wah, 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 wah. Wrong. I found my thrill. You're such a potsy. Sit on it. Yowza, yowza, yowza. Okay, these are catchphrases, things we heard the characters say all throughout the history of Happy Days. I bring this stuff up because as we sit here, I'm sure I could say sit on it, and you know exactly Happy Days. You know what I'm talking about. They all said it.
And the funny thing is sitting on it is a derogatory term.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if people don't. Okay, I lived during that time, and to complete the sentence, what used to be said in the 70s when you were saying something derogatory to somebody, sit on it and rotate.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and
That's what people used to say back in the 70s. Sit on it and rotate.
In fact,
now, in your mind, what do you don't? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what you're saying.
Yeah, my mind already went there.
But they didn't complete the sentence. They just said sit on it, which made it pass the mustard with the network censors. The censors.
Yeah, and Gar,
because in the 70s the censors were strong. I mean, they were like they wielded a lot of power in the 70s.
In fact,
so they really kind of sidestepped the censors by not completing that sentence.
Yeah,
and a lot of people don't know that now. They just think sit on it. No, sit on it. Back in those days, in the 70s, was actually something that was said to another person that did not mean good.
In fact, in reference to Happy Days, sit on it started as something Fonzie told somebody, and then one by one, all the other characters eventually said it became the thing to say. And then even like Mrs. C, who's the most mild-tempered woman, you hardly ever hear her yell, but there's a few episodes when her and Mr. C are really kind of going at it and getting into it and arguing, and there's been a couple episodes where Mrs. C would say, "Oh, Howard, sit on it," and it's basically, believe it or not, because for a woman like Marion Cunningham to get that upset where she's kind of yelling and speaking loud, it's kind of became the equivalent of "fu." It's like, and you
basically that is what it was, a clean way of saying "fu." It really was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Back in the 70s, when you said "sit on it and rotate," that's basically you were saying to another person is "fu."
And of course, that was the Fonz. I mean, I don't even have to explain that, but it became basically his way of, I mean, it could be whatever he wanted. Hey, everybody, I'm cool. Everybody knows it. It's understood.
Like, forget about it.
Yeah, it's understood. And then now another funny one that I mentioned. That's of course Richie Cunningham's kind of nervous laughter, like when Fonzie would ask him for his advice, and he kind of wouldn't be agreeing with Fonzie. He'd be like, "Oh, Fonz," like even one episode where Fonzie tells Richie, "Hey, Rich, I want your opinion on this," and he'd be like, "Give me one of your good ha-ha-has." And it became a thing too with Richie Cunningham. His way, like not even a word would tell how he felt.
Well, if you don't have that 70s show without Happy Days.
Yeah, that's true.
And the birth of a lot of other shows. You don't have a lot of those other shows without Happy Days. So Happy Days wasn't just a hugely successful show. Happy Days is also responsible for the birth of other shows, basically utilizing the same type of formula.
Yeah. And Gar, another one of these kind of catchphrases I want to really be sure we touch upon is, of course, another Richie one. I found my thrill. And of course that was his way of letting people know that he thought he was about to get lucky or that he was going to have a good date. He'd get all excited. In fact, there's one episode where he wants to go with the girl, but he wishes he had his own apartment. He borrows Fonzie's apartment, and he thinks he's going to get lucky. He starts to pull out Fonzie's couch as the girl's doing her stuff in the bathroom, and I got my thrill. And then his dad and the girl's dad come up to find them, and he's like, "Oh no, I'm in big trouble." But it would be his way of telling people, "I think I'm going to get lucky."
It's a lot of those. Some of those terms, came from the Big Bopper too.
Oh wow! See, I wasn't even aware of that. And Gar, like you mentioned, there were many spinoffs from a show. The very first one, of course, was Laverne and Shirley. We should talk a little bit about that because how that started was the two girls originally appeared on an episode of Happy Days. And I don't think there was even a thought originally of having a spinoff, but they got such a reaction from those two girls appearing on the episode. And, of course, Penny Marshall, who played Laverne DeFazio, was, of course, the show's creator, Gary Marshall's sister, who'd previously been in another Gary Marshall thing, the TV show The Odd Couple, before Happy Days. So that is where Penny Marshall's career kind of really broke out in a huge way.
Well, you mentioned The Odd Couple, but you don't have Two and a Half Men without The Odd Couple.
That's true. And, of course, referencing, once again, the great American Graffiti, you might not even have Shirley Feeney without American Graffiti, of course, because Cindy Williams was, of course, played the role of Ron Howard's wife in American Graffiti, and that's where they first kind of initially met and hooked up.
Well, just like you were saying that Laverne and Shirley was kind of launched, from Happy Days.
Yeah.
Happy Days was launched by Love American Style.
Yeah.
In the exact same way.
Yeah, that doesn't get mentioned too often. And, of course, another great spinoff was Mork and Mindy. And, of course, I think we're going to have to do an episode on that down in the future, Gar. But we got to bring up Mork and Mindy because, again, very much like Laverne and Shirley, the idea for that show came from Robin Williams appearing on an episode of Happy Days, where the creation of Mork came to life, which I think was a combination of Gary Marshall and Robin Williams creating what that character would become.
Which is another launched from Happy Days, and a lot of people don't know this, but the ratings spiked when he was on that show, and the executives immediately were going, "Hey, this guy." You know what I mean? This guy has an appeal, obviously. And so they decided to launch Mork and Mindy. And, by today, nobody even knows about the show.
Yeah.
But back in the 70s, when Mork and Mindy was on, oh my God, I cannot stress enough how popular that show was. I remember people scrambling to be home in time to be able to catch Mork and Mindy because he just had everybody so riveted, because nobody had seen a character that was like that was absolutely hilarious. His brand of comedy was a brand new brand of comedy, and America just latched onto it right from the start.
Well, and here's the thing, Gar. Well, a lot of kids today might not have any idea what Mork and Mindy is. I think most people alive today at least know who Robin Williams was. That's to show you, kind of highlight the career that he was able to have as a result of being on Happy Days. I mean, I dare say he's probably had the biggest movie career of anybody on that show. I mean, other than maybe Ron Howard, who I don't know if you'd consider him a movie star, but he's definitely been successful in Hollywood since leaving Happy Days as a director. He's kind of had a different type of career, but nonetheless successful,
Very, very successful, it's really, that is where America first discovered Robin Williams.
Yeah, and
man, it's really lost, in the whole thing, it's just a faded memory now where most people don't even know anything about it. But Mork and Mindy was super popular.
Oh, sure it was. I used to watch it too, Gar.
I cannot stress how popular that show was.
And here's another thing. We really got to highlight Robin Williams' appearance on that show. I mean, the first appearance was so big that they had him come back for a second episode. I'm not sure what the time frame was between the shows, but he was such a popular thing on Happy Days. They had to do a second episode, and then eventually Mork and Mindy is launched, and he goes on to have a successful movie career. But also, Gar, you got to look at the time. I mean, the fact for a family sitcom to have an episode where we have an alleged human-like alien from another planet come, and people don't even question. I mean, again, we're being entertained and we're watching this, but I think most people watching a sitcom back then probably wasn't expecting this alien to make. But it no, again, because we love a show, we don't even question it. We consider. People more consider, okay, maybe it's a possibility. Wouldn't it be cool if there was an alien like that? He's sure making me laugh. He's sure making me. I think back in the 70s, to say that Mork and Mindy was the first of this kind, not necessarily fair to say that, because I think it was kind of maybe a modern take on My Favorite Martian, which of course came before.
But what was different was Robin Williams. What Robin Williams brought to that character was not being done by any other actor at that time.
And again, back in the 70s,
it was just so out of left field, but good. I mean, not just out of left field. It was it was hilarious. People were just dying laughing at what he was doing. And people had never really seen that style of comedy before.
Yeah, and again, not even questioning that it's based and centered around this alleged alien, human-like alien from outer space. We didn't even care if it could really happen or not. It's like we're tuning into the show to laugh. We're tuning into the show to be entertained. That's what mattered.
Yeah. It's not about the believability. It's about the laughs.
Yeah. And there was a ton of the laughs. And that's the thing. You're talking about back when Happy Days was originally on. I never forget. To this day, Tuesday nights, it was Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and Three's Company for Me. It was a triple threat of shows that night, and for several years that was the case. And then one by one.
Oh man, and all three shows, I absolutely loved.
Yeah, and of course, much of the cast is still alive, but we've lost quite a few of them. Of course, let's go down the list. I mean, of course, the lovable Mr. C, played by Tom Bosley, is no longer among us. But we remember him quite fondly. Like I said, I think he will always be remembered as America's dad. Ideal family dad. Marion Cunningham, oddly enough, played by Marion Ross. She just recently turned, I think, 95 or 96. She's very much still among us. She's pretty much retired. Don't hear or see from her too much, but she's still alive and well. What's really funny, Gar, is these cast of characters we grew up, like the kids that were very young back then. They're all now in their 70s, and kind of that's kind of also a passage of time. Of for me, all these people that I watched on TV, they're all getting old, which means I'm getting old.
Well, and what's so I notice this now. It has with the internet. And Facebook and all of this stuff. There's a new trend nowadays that I don't like, and it's to me it's people showing their worst character.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is we all, say for example, we all grew up watching Potsy on Happy Days, and he is
Potsy
always going to be that character, because whenever you see it on TV, he never ages. He stays the same. Through all these years. And we see that.
Yeah.
And then we turn around and we see what that person looks like now.
Yeah.
And there's this thing, called age shaming now that goes on the internet. And it's a really true showing of a person's worst character.
Sure.
To shame a person for aging. You know what I mean? How do you get off on making someone feel bad about something that there's nothing you can do to stop it from happening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's always done by a younger generation, but what that younger generation does not realize is very quickly they are going to become the person being shamed.
Oh yeah, Gar, and
and so they don't. They're so stupid at this age that they're doing this, shaming a person for something that is a natural progression of life, and shaming them for it. They're not realizing they're gonna get their dose.
Sure.
They're gonna get it from another generation that's younger than them, and then they're gonna see what it feels like to have somebody shame you for something that it's just a natural progression of life, and that's that I see that happening a lot.
Yeah, and Gar, I'm going to respond to that real quick because I totally agree with you. But here's the thing, I like today when I announced that we were going to be doing an episode on the 50th anniversary of Happy Days and doing like a second show on Happy Days. I found a great old picture of the cast, from back in the day. And the reason I did that, because a huge reason you and I do these episodes is we're a fan of all this stuff. And the thing is, like, when I think of Happy Days, the thing is, like you're saying, I realize people get older and that, but the way Ron Howard looked in Happy Days, that will always be Richie Cunningham to me. The way Henry Winkler, that will always be the Fonz. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but like I post that picture because it takes me back to that time when I was watching Happy Days on TV. That will always be my vision of Happy Days. And it's interesting because I think in a way, those people are like forever young, if you know what I mean. And then when you do see...
there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when you're shaming somebody for it.
Yeah, and that's what's kind of funny. When I do see kind of a modern day picture of Ron Howard, he's got gray hair, and like you said, that's a natural progression. And to me, that's kind of what makes it interesting. Oh, okay, that's what he looks like now, but this is how I will always remember it. And that's just kind of the state of affairs, And I think when people look back on this retro stuff, we think of it as it was back then, because that's what it means to us, That's just the state of the way things are here. Yeah. Well,
I just had to bring that up because that, when you see, when you see, old episodes of Happy Days, you get to see them all in the prime of their life.
Yeah.
And they're all, like you said, they're in their 70s now, so, I'm just appalled about,
I'm with you.
People doing that, it's just, it's a really showing of, displaying bad character.
Yeah.
Openly displaying bad character.
Oh, sure.
And not even realizing the hurt.
Sure.
That they are bestowing on people that don't deserve that hurt.
Oh, sure. And Gar, just take this a step further, what we're talking about here. You look at somebody like, take Randy Rhoads, died tragically young in that plane crash. The man was only 24 years old. And so when talking about Randy Rhoads, he's one that will really forever be young in the sense that not only because he died at age 24, but because anytime you see a picture of Randy Rhoads, he was only 24 years old. You're never going to... He didn't live long enough to even have for you to see a picture of him with even a gray hair. Whereas on the flip side, Eddie Van Halen lived to be 65 years old. So he's immortalized, and he will always kind of maybe be forever young, but not so much like Randy Rhoads, because also, Eddie Van Halen had different looks throughout his life. By the time he died, he'd grown a beard, he'd cut his hair, he had gray hair. Looks a little bit different, but again, when these celebrities die, like especially a guy like Eddie Van Halen, he's forever kind of immortalized in the way we want to remember him. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's that it's also a parallel with musicians, because musicians in their heyday were young, and all the girls, they had their promo pictures and everything, and that whole thing, and now they're older.
Yeah.
Like the David Lee Roths.
Yeah.
You look at what David Lee Roth looked like in his prime.
Yeah,
and all those sexy pictures and things like that. And now you look at him.
Yeah.
And people will shame David Lee Roth now.
I give him credit for still doing what he does. And, I think the worst example of what you're talking about is people talking crap about Vince Neil because his weight goes up and down. And I will just say, let the man...
Another example, yes.
Let the poor man live his life. He suffered, worst thing probably... losing a daughter, a young daughter.
The amount of people, once you become like in your 60s... become overweight.
That's just a fact of life.
It's just a natural progression of life.
Yeah, metabolism.
I'm lucky that I'm in that age group, and I'm not. But it
takes discipline too, Gar.
I'm lucky
to keep it.
I'm really lucky.
Well, Gar,
because most people that are my age don't look like me or weigh the same amount that I do. I am not the norm. You know what I mean?
But I think in your case too, Gar,
is the norm.
I think in your case, Gar, you're a little disciplined also. But I think the fact that you get up on stage when you have a show and perform for however long, an hour or two, you sweat a lot of your stuff off.
Yeah, but so does Vince Neil.
Yeah, but yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see.
What my point is I'm not the norm.
Yeah.
But Vince Neil is the norm.
Yeah, and that's a great place to bring this episode to an end. I can't believe another hour's gone by, Gar. We always have so much fun doing this. In fact, you and I let people know we were kind of just talking about our next 2 or 3 episodes. We'll save that for another day, but I will let the folks know. In 2 weeks when we get together again, we're going to be talking. We're going to be talking about the Beatles' #1 greatest hits album, and the reason we're going to be doing that is, of course, we recently did our 3-part episode on the Ed Sullivan Show, and one of those episodes included you and me picking our top 5 each favorite live performances from the Ed Sullivan Show, and it could be whatever we wanted. And your #1 happened to be the Beatles, which I think a lot of people will agree with. And oddly enough, Gar, the Beatles, the #1 album, the fact that they had 27 #1 hits, I thought that was pretty impressive. Come to find out, we'll get more into this next time we do this, Elvis had a few more #1s than the Beatles, but he did come before the Beatles too. But what was interesting was the fact that, and we're kind of having a play on words here, the Beatles were your #1 top performer from the Ed Sullivan Show. That was your pick, and the fact that they have 27 #1 hits, we're going to get specifically into the #1 hits and talk about some of our favorite ones. So I think that will be a real fun episode next time to do.
Absolutely, I can't wait.
And Gar, one more thing I got to tell you. Yesterday I was at the Orange County Fair, and I got to catch a great performance of 2 great tribute bands. One was, I think they're a new band. I never heard of them. The Monkey Men, obviously a monkey tribute band. They were great, I got to tell you. And they were opening up for the Fab Four, which I know you were friends with one of the guys, so that they put.
Artie Saroff, is the Paul McCartney.
Oh, okay.
And for many years, I used to work for the largest musical instrument company, basically in the world.
Wow.
And Artie was one of my customers. I met him right at the very beginning when he first got the gig as Paul McCartney. And back in those days, he was a right-handed bass player.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know this. He on purpose relearned how to play bass left-handed. Now think about this.
Yeah.
Now, this is more than just taking the bass and learning how to play it left-handed. That is daunting enough.
Yeah.
But along with the fact that now he's playing bass left-handed, he also has to sing and do the background vocals and all of that other stuff while he's playing bass left-handed, which makes it even more difficult. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so you really have to tip your hat to Artie.
Sure.
Because a lot of people don't know that about him. He really took things incredibly seriously, taught himself how to play left-handed. Not only that, but when he sings, he sounds just like Paul McCartney.
He really does. Even his talking voice, and we'll end on this. I just want to tell anybody, if you ever get a chance to go see the Fab Four, I would say they are the premier Beatles tribute band out there right now. I was not disappointed. The only thing I wish they would have played Let It Be, but other than that, they played every song you'd want to hear, and I think the only reason they didn't include that last night, I think they were their time was limited, how much they were allowed to play.
Yeah. You have a certain amount of time, when you're a professional and you're in that situation that you have a specific time. When you honor that and you do that, it reflects really well on you.
Yeah.
When you are a musician and you are allotted a certain amount of time and you go over, it reflects very badly on you. It can reflect bad enough that you will never be invited back.
Yeah, so I understand that.
People don't know that. Those are some of those dividing lines between professional and non-professional.
Yeah, and thanks for telling us about that, because I think you're right. A lot of people, but go see the Fab Four if you get a chance. You will not be disappointed. That is my recommendation.
One more thing. Also, a lot of people don't know that the Fab Four have some absolutely wonderful Christmas albums that they released, where what they did is they did Christmas songs as if the Beatles did those Christmas songs. And they really do sound like that.
Yeah, they do.
You know what I mean? You could put on the Fab Four's Christmas and you would actually think it was the Beatles. Oh my gosh, I didn't know the Beatles released a Christmas album.
Hey, Gar.
You know what I mean?
In closing, Gar, I think you gave us a great idea today right there for one of our holiday episodes, and we're just going to leave it at that.
Okay.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.